All right, hello and welcome to lesson 5 of Last Epoch University. This one is on crafting, which has been a really hot topic right now in the alien community because it just changed pretty drastically from one system to another. It maintains some of the old functions, but also changed up a lot of things. So this also means that there's a lot of information out there that is not correct, not because the people who said them were wrong at the time, but because they said them before the crafting changes. So be careful looking at any other information. Make sure it's at 0.8.4 or after. Otherwise, it's definitely not going to be correct. I do have another guide out already on crafting because of all the changes, but that was geared more towards players who already were familiar with the existing system. This one will be geared more towards new players to the game who aren't familiar with crafting at all, but there will be some cases where I talk about the old system, just because of that whole scenario of the possibility of getting confused between the two systems, and I will try to make sure to steer in the right direction on that. Okay, so what can you do with crafting in LE? Like, what's the value of crafting? The reality is it's very valuable. Everyone does it. We do it early game, we do it late game. You can get away for a long time without crafting, but at some point you're going to want to craft if you want to make gear that is good enough to fit the needs of the content that you're playing. So crafting can add affixes to craftable items. It can also improve the tiers of pre-existing affixes. It can increase the tier, or it can improve the role within the tier. It can remove fixes. It can change fixes. It can improve implicit roles. It can also improve roles within affixes. And it can create, actually I said that earlier, improve role within the tier. It can also create uniques. Okay. So what can you craft on? Any white, blue, or yellow, also purple gear that has forging potential. So all of these items start with a pseudo-random amount of forging potential, which is determined by a system that considers whether or not it's a yellow or exalt, or a blue or a white. Exalted generally have the most. There was a bug that was preventing this from happening that just got fixed, so anyone who's telling you it doesn't work, it now does. Yellows have generally the second most, blues third most, white's the least, but it also is level requirement dependent, so higher level items are going to generally have more forging potential than lower level items. Do note that exalted affixes and tier 5 affixes, so anything tier 5, 6, or 7 cannot be crafted on, but the other affixes on the item will be able to. You can, although you can remove a tier 5, 6, or 7 with the rune of removal. You cannot craft it all on uniques, idols, or blessings. The legendary system is kind of like a crafting system, as you take a unique and you put an exalted into it and you come out with a legendary, but that's a different system than the actual official crafting system, so we're not going to talk about that today. I do talk about that in other parts of the Last Epoch University. Let's talk about forging potential a little bit more. I mentioned that they all have some sort of forging potential on them. It's a pseudo-random / pseudo-deterministic, depending on, there's like a range that everything can roll in, but what that range is determined by the rarity and the level. But what is that actually used for? So every craft costs a range of forging potential. It always starts with 1 and goes to some larger number than that. What that range is determined by the tier of fix that you're crafting on if you're trying to upgrade it, or the rune being used. So if you use a rune of removal, it has a particular amount of crafting potential that it uses. I think it's 1 to 25. If you use some of the other runes, they're going to have different ones. Some runes don't have any, but generally I think that's going to modify the item, like a rune of shaping has another, I think it's another 1 to 25. As far as tiers go and affixes, let's look at what those look like. So a new affix will cost you 1 to 18. A tier 4 to 5 will cost you 1 to 24. As you can see here, we have a tier 4 that we would craft up to tier 5. It's going to cost 1 to 24 forging potential. If I were to try to put on a new one here, let's just put cold resist. It costs me 1 to 18. That does not necessarily mean that everything in between, though, is like higher than the 0 to 1. And lower than the 4 to 5. The 0 to 1 is, I think, the second highest. Let's see, 2 to 3 would cost us 1 to 12, for example. That's quite a bit cheaper than 0 to 1. 0 to 1 is expensive because you get to choose exactly what affix you want to put on the item. Do be aware, though, this is something that was very confusing to players early on. and still is actually, crafting skews towards the lower potential use. A lot of players are scared by the numbers. They see 1 to 18 and you think, well, that means there's an average use of 9, and if I have an item with 15 forging potential, that means I'm going to average no more than 2 crafts on the item. But that's not correct, because the 1 to 18 doesn't mean the average is 9, because the system actually skews lower. What exactly the number is not currently known, but we have gotten affirmation or confirmation, excuse me, from the devs that it does skew lower. My own opinion is it's probably, if it's a 1 to 18, it's probably somewhere around like 4 or 5. But that's just based on experience. It's not a hard and fast number. I definitely know. The other thing to factor in is that you can also avoid using any potential. There's always a chance that it critically successes. There's a critical success that occurs when you get a critical success on a craft. And this can happen in any craft that you do, where you're upgrading from one tier to another. It gives you that craft for free. It doesn't cost any forging potential. It gives you an additional tier randomly on one of the affixes that it currently has for free. So you get 2 free crafts. And you also get, you don't use any of the materials that you'd put in. So if you put in a shard, which you will have, it doesn't use that. And it won't even use like a glyph if you put a glyph in there. So it's a very, very powerful system that is very beneficial to the player. You can also put a rune of hope in there, which we'll talk about a little more in a bit. And that gives you a 25% chance to not use any forging potential anytime you craft, or anytime you upgrade a tier from a lower tier to a higher tier. There are lots of ways to be successful in the system beyond what it shows you up front. Crafting is also pseudo-deterministic. Now, this is something that I sort of coined for it. Not everyone calls it that. A lot of people call it deterministic. But I don't think that's the most accurate way of putting it. So here's why I say it's pseudo-deterministic and not deterministic. You get to choose what affixes you put on the items. That's definitely deterministic. You choose exactly what affix you want to put on it. You're determining what affix that is. There is no RNG involved. It's just I'm choosing to put, for example, strength on this item. And there's nothing that's going to change that I'm putting strength on it if I make that decision. When improving existing affixes, the upgraded tiers are also deterministic. For example, if you choose to go, if you have strength on it and you have a tier 2 and you choose to upgrade to tier 3, it's deterministic that you will go up to tier 3. In fact, in this system, you can't actually fail. The old system, you were capable of failing, and that's when you fractured it. But that's no longer the case. Now, even if you have some forging potential and you hit 0 on the craft, you still get the craft, you just can't craft any further. Now, the roles within, when you upgrade from a tier 2 to a tier 3, for example, are not deterministic, unless you use a glyph of order, which we'll talk about later. So you could have a high roll in tier 2 and end up with a low roll in tier 3, or a high roll in tier 2 and end up with a high roll in tier 3. There's no guarantee one way or another if you're not using glyph of order. Removing affixes is random if you use a rune of removal. And a glyph of chaos is generally random. Glyph of chaos, we'll talk about all these things in a little bit, but glyph of chaos just changes the affix that you have from a different affix. And it's generally random, or mostly random, except that it factors in rarity of the affix. So rarer affixes are less likely than common affixes. Changing the implicit is also random. So if you use a rune of shaping, you have a low roll on your implicit and you use the shaping, you might end up with another low roll, you might end up with a high roll. There's no guarantee one way or the other. And how much forging potential used per craft is semi-random. We explained that in the last section. And so yeah, it's not random in the sense that you're going to average out right in the median, and also there's the crit success chance, and you have some control over the glyph of hope. But otherwise, it's random. Okay, just mentioned that items can fracture, or could fracture in the old system, excuse me. And you've probably or possibly heard about this, depending on what kind of information you've consumed about Last Epoch up to this point. If you've heard items can fracture, is this still true? The answer is no. It does not fracture at all. There is no fracturing whatsoever in the game at all at this point. It was an old mechanic that caused the item to become uncraftable. At 0.8.4, which as of this recording is the current patch, that no longer exists. The old system used instability to determine the likelihood of a fracture, but that was replaced with forging potential, as we've covered. And reaching 0 forging potential makes the item uncraftable. Fairly similar to fracturing, with two major differences. If you reach 0 on a craft, you still get that craft successfully, whereas the fracturing system, you would fail that craft. And the second thing is, in the fracturing system, it was possible to actually damage the item and remove some of the affixes. That is no longer the case. You can never damage an item. There's no reason to not craft an item to its full potential with a new system. Okay, let's talk about how to craft. So to start, you press F to open the crafting screen. Like so, F. And then you place the item you want in there. This one. And then you choose what you want to craft on. These are the affixes. These are the prefixes. These are the suffixes. It's only showing one here because I don't have any on that. But if I were to place one on this, please don't go to 0 forging potential on me. Let's just use a Glyph of Hope to try to guarantee it. There we go. Now I have a 4th one. There's always 4 in here unless you use a Glyph of Despair. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. So from here, I have choices. I'm currently set up to forge further on the fire resistance over here. I have a tier 5 level javelin here, so this is no longer craftable because it is at its max. I can craft on minion damage if I want to over here, or I can create a new one over here. I can also add runes over here, or excuse me, glyphs over here. Glyph of Hope, Glyph of Chaos, Glyph of Order, etc. I can add runes into here. Generally, runes don't upgrade these, whereas glyphs do, or they affect these. They actually do all, I think, upgrade. Yeah, they all actually upgrade, and then do some other effect usually. Whereas runes will actually replace that, and you'll do something with the item as a whole. So shattering will actually try to give you some shards back. It will destroy the item. Refinement will change the rolls. We're going to get into this in a few minutes. But that's how you actually do all of the different things in here. Pretty simple system overall. You really do have the affixes here. You have your glyphs here, and you have your runes here. And that's all you really have to worry about the forging system. It's pretty well designed. Oh, right. I should also tell you the bottom area, giving you the information you need. So it tells you what your likelihood of success is. So if I click on this, and yeah, I have everything set up here. It tells me that I have 1 to 12 forging potential, and it will cost, 1 to 12 forging potential, and I have 4 forging potential remaining currently. So I will of course get the craft because I can't fail it. But there's a decent chance I wouldn't get this. Things go poorly. And even better than that, if I actually do the craft, so let's just go ahead. It will tell me how things went down here. So I got tier 3, 11% increased minion damage because of it. And Glyph of Hope preserved my forging potential. So I used Glyph of Hope and it worked out really well for me. That's great. Okay. Let's talk about shards, because we mentioned that already, and well, from there we'll go into the support items, the glyphs and the runes. The shards are the crafting material that determines the type of affix being crafted. We're seeing in here we've got the javelin, the minion damage, the fire resistance, etc. And when I click on this, I get a bunch of affixes down here. These are shards. These are all shards I've collected. Yeah, I've collected a lot of shards because I've played this game a whole lot. Use those to do the actual craft. So if I don't have a shard, I can't do the craft. If I don't have a fire resistance shard, I can't upgrade this. And if I don't have a lightning resistance shard, I can't add this over here. So shards are the basic material you need to craft any affixes onto items, whether it be a new affix or upgrade the affix further. They can be acquired in 3 ways. They can drop in the world just on their own. They're just shards that drop on the ground. You pick them up. You can use a shattering rune on an item with the desired affixes. How many shards you receive is random. It's based on the tiers of affixes on the item. So if I were to use a shattering on this, I have 1 chance of getting a fire resistance. I have 5 chances of getting a level of javelin, and 3 chances of getting minion damage. There's no guarantee I'll get any more than 1 total shard. I'm guaranteed 1 total shard from this whole thing with a Rune of Shattering. Nothing else. The nice thing about Rune of Shattering is I can use it even if I have no forging potential. So if I just brick an item, it's not going to work out. It's no good for me, but I want the shards back. I will use a Rune of Shattering to try to get those shards back and see what happens. Now, if I haven't bricked the item, there's an affix I really want to get the shards off of. Like, just the item itself is not going to be good. I'm not going to be able to craft it. But there are shards that are valuable to me. I can use a Rune of Removal. I'm guaranteed the shards equivalent to the tier of the affix that I removed. But what is removed is random, and it costs forging potential. So if I put the rune of removal in here, and I were to click on this, and I were to remove level of javelin, I would get 5 shards. If it were to remove fire resistance, I'd get 1. But it would also cost me forging potential, which could put me at 0, effectively preventing me from doing any more crafting on the item at that point. So if you're going to continue to craft an item, this is obviously a very risky thing. You usually want to do this if you want shards, or if you really need to remove an affix and you want to take a shot at getting that affix off of there. The item's not going to be good without it. This has a double kind of use, the rune of removal. We're going to talk about that more in a bit. Okay, shards vary in rarity as well. Some are difficult to acquire, others will drop often. For example, that level of javelin is a pretty rare affix. Usually these plus skills, javelin's a skill that exists in the game. Those are going to be rare. Class specifics are going to be rare. Some other ones are also rare. And then some are very common. Strength is common. Added health is common. What it is predetermined by the game. And so you'll have a whole lot of some shards and very few others, and you might have to actually target certain shards using, for example, the shattering and the rune of removal. All right, let's talk about modifier items. We'll start with runes. Runes are the ones that go right here. So, excuse me, geez, I don't know why I'm skipping or I'm confusing glyphs and runes today. Runes are right here. So all these guys. So we'll start with the rune of shattering, but first we'll mention that they only drop in the world except for shattering. So everything else but shattering you can only get as a world drop or a Monolith of Fate reward, which is basically a world drop. But shattering you can purchase from the vendor for 2,000 gold, which may seem like a lot at first, but as you're playing the game more and more, that will be a very inconsequential number. Okay, Rune of Shattering is used to acquire more shards. That's its primary purpose. It doesn't really have any other purpose. It destroys the item. It doesn't cost any forging potential, so you can use it on a 0 forging potential item. On every tier of an affix represents a chance to acquire the affix. It can get more than 1 shard from tier 2 plus affixes, but no more than 1 from tier 1. You're guaranteed at least 1 shard, but not 1 of each affix. This is basically just going back over what we talked about earlier. Rune of Refinement, we haven't really talked about too much. Rune of Refinement rerolls affixes within tiers. So, if I were to use a Rune of Refinement on this item, what would happen is, let's see what my rolls are here. So, for example, plus 2 to Javelin, the range in that's 2 to 2, that wouldn't change. 41 to 60 on the increased throwing damage. And then minion damage is 22 to 30, and I'm at 29. Fire resistance at 5 to 9. So if I did this, it would change all those numbers that have any range. And it could be good, it could be bad. It's completely random what you'll get. Right now, these are generally rolled pretty well, so I probably wouldn't use it on this. I wouldn't use it on an item that's at this level of crafting anyway. But if I had something that just rolled really poorly on an important stat, like increased health, for example, just rolled at the lower tier, I might use a refinement to try to get that higher. Rune of Removal, we've talked about, and that doesn't really do much more than what we mentioned. It removes 1 affix of an item randomly and refunds all the tiers, and it costs forging potential. I should mention also the forging potential cost of Rune of Refinement is 1 to 15. And Rune of Removal is very expensive. It's 1 to 25. So you're really only using this on very specific things. There's two scenarios. You want Rune of Removal. When you're trying to get shards on an item that you don't want to keep, or you have an affix that you absolutely cannot live with and don't want to chaos, whether it be whether you can't because it's a tier 5, or it's just super important that you not chaos it, because I mean the odds technically are better for removal than chaos, because you have like at worst a 25% chance of removing what you want. So in those cases you might use it, but it is very expensive, and so you have to factor that in whenever you're choosing to take advantage of it. Okay, Rune of Discovery is a very interesting one. This is one of the new ones. It adds a random tier 1 affix to all empty affix slots, and it does not cost forging potential. We can actually take advantage of this here. So we've got this empty slot here, right? And we could try to craft on it. We could try, let's do cold resistance. The problem is we have 4 forging potential. It costs 1 to 18. So there's a decent chance this will just finish the craft. Another option we can do is Rune of Discovery. Costs no forging potential, and the other thing it does is it skews towards more rare item or more rare affixes. So if there's rare affixes in this pool, it's more likely to get this than say a random drop in the world well. If we do this, we got necrotic resistance. There's a lot of uses for this. My favorite one is when leveling. It's just an absolutely cheap, super cheap way in the campaign, especially relatively early in the campaign, to add more power to the character without losing any forging potential whatsoever. If you get lucky and you get some good affixes, even better. But so many affixes are valuable when you're in the campaign that getting a rune of discovery and using it on an item with, say, 2 affixes is really, really good. Let's talk about rune of shaping. We mentioned this a little bit earlier. It just randomly rerolls implicits on an item. It works similar to rune of refinement, but it just affects the implicit on the item instead of the affixes themselves. So on this item, we have increased armor and void res, 5 to 12 on both. So if we did a rune of shaping, it will change those numbers randomly to something else. Now, just to make sure that there's no confusion, if you've heard from people who are used to the old system used to skew the rune of shaping specifically towards the middle, which was frustrating for players who are trying to get really top tier gear. It no longer does that. It now has no skewing whatsoever. It's completely random. Rune of Ascendance, another new one, as is Rune of Creation, which we'll talk about soon. Changes an item to a unique of that type. So the unique it changes it to is determined by base type. So for example, a ring. If you have a ring, it will convert it to a unique ring. But it's not the specific base item. So a silver ring has no bearing on it. Doesn't matter if it's a silver ring or a gold ring or any of the ring types. It only matters that it's a ring that you put in there, and when you do that, you'll get a unique ring out of it. It's a good way to target farm the unique rings that drop randomly in the world, along with the Monolith of Fate, which has some target farming opportunities as well. If you really needed a ring, a particular ring, and you had some Rune of Ascendance, tossing some rings into the forge and then using the Rune of Ascendance on them is a way to potentially get that item you need. Now, the Rune of Creation is particularly powerful. If you've played PoE, you are Path of Exile, you're probably familiar with the Mirror, one of the most rare items in the game. And what this does, similar to the Mirror, is it duplicates an item. It takes it exactly as it is and makes another copy of it. What does this a little different than the Mirror is it reduces the forging potential to 0, so you can no longer craft on it. The Mirror doesn't do that in PoE, so that one's more powerful than this one, but this one still has a lot of applications. Well, a couple of really valuable applications, I should say. For example, you do that on a ring. The ring is just absolutely S tier. It's an amazing ring. Like, man, I really wish I could wear 2 of these rings. Rune of Creation, now you can, assuming you have some forging potential. If you have 0 forging potential, you can't use this, by the way, so don't use up all of your forging potential on a great item if you want to mirror it. The other thing this can be really good for is the legendary system. If you have an exalted item that you want to put in to the eternity cache along with a unique, but you don't have a 4 legendary potential unique, and you're worried that you might not get the affixes you want off of it, you can use a Rune of Creation to create a copy of it and get 2 shots at it. You can also use it just to be like, okay, I want to make this legendary, but I also actually just want this ring because it's really good. So that's where the general applications of the Rune of Creation tend to lie. All right, let's talk about glyphs. Glyphs are affecting the actual affixes of an item. They're very valuable for high-level crafts, but nowadays Glyph of Hope and Glyph of Chaos can be used pretty liberally with just about any crafting, and I definitely recommend doing it even in the story because they're common drops. Let's get into them a little bit more. All these things only drop in the world. You can't buy them from the vendor like you can with the Rune of Shattering. And it can be used with shards or runes, certain runes, to alter the outcome of the craft. So for example, using it on runes, let's say we want to put on let's do Rune of Shaping, because that's a particularly interesting one right now because it's got a very high forging potential. You really want to shape this item. Man, you're worried because you don't have much forging potential, and what if it goes badly? Well, you can use a Rune of Hope to give yourself an additional 25% chance to have no forging potential cost. That at least mitigates some of the risk of using a Rune of Shaping. Okay, let's talk about that Glyph of Hope and the other glyphs directly. So Glyph of Hope, again, 25% chance that the craft will cost no forging potential. This is kind of like the meat and potatoes item. Anytime that you want to upgrade an affix directly, you're not worried about, say, making sure the roll range stays the same. You just want to get it from tier whatever to the next tier up, tier 2 to tier 3, tier 3 to tier 4, etc. Glyph of Hope anytime that you possibly can, because this will give you more forging potential overall in the long run, 25% more over the long run. You'll get 25% more effectively crafts from just using Glyph of Hope. This is a highly used item that's also a common drop, so there's no reason to hoard these things, even in the story, even with a new character. Use them liberally because you're going to get a lot of them. Glyph of Chaos, similar in its rarity, very common, much different use scenario. So this upgrades the affix to the next tier, tier 2 to tier 3, tier 3 to tier 4, etc. But it also changes it to a random affix, but only the affix that can roll in that slot on that item. So, for example, if you're looking at this item once again, we have tier 3 minion damage. That's not very good with Javelin. We want to get that to something else. You do the upgrade with this, and you also do the Glyph of Chaos. And when it does the upgrade, it's going to roll this to something within the prefixes of a Sentinel Relic. So anything that can roll within the prefix of Sentinel Relic is fair game for this. It does skew with rarity. Other than that, it's a random system. So you might get something good, you might not. It's a roll of the dice. But if you have an affix that just is absolutely trash for your build, there's no reason really not to do it, accounting for the costs on the forging potential. Glyph of Order upgrades the affix to the next tier while also maintaining the roll within its range. So if you get a really good roll and you want to maintain it up to tier 5, this is a great way to do that. Bear in mind, like Chaos, it has an opportunity cost. You can't use Glyph of Hope if you use this. So, only use this on rolls that are really important to you, or else you might find that your crafting potential isn't as high as you'd like. Glyph of Despair is an especially interesting one and one of my favorites. It has a chance to seal the affix into a 5th affix slot instead of upgrading it. I'd love to show you what this looks like. I haven't successfully done it yet because Glyph of Despair is incredibly rare, and also the higher the affix, the less likely you are to be successful. I just learned this today. So I've been trying to get tier 4s to seal, and I have not managed to do it yet, but I hope to do it soon. So this is obviously really powerful because this is the only way to get a 5th affix slot in a just regular crafted item outside of, legendaries and uniques. So what would happen in this particular case is, let's say I took the minion damage, and I'm like, I actually like minion damage for some reason with this build. I don't know why I would, but I'd actually like minion damage. And let's say I have more forging potential than 4, and I actually have a shot at doing some further crafting on this item. Then I could put this on here, and I could upgrade the minion damage, and it would either, 1, go to tier 4 minion damage, and do nothing else other than cost forging potential, or it will become this 5th slot. It'll go somewhere else and become uncraftable at that point. It'll just show up here as a 5th slot. You won't see it here anymore, but this will then open up to a brand new slot, and you'll be able to continue crafting this slot with a different effects than minion damage, but you'll maintain the minion damage on the item. Very, very powerful. Also, not super easy to get. This is definitely high level crafting stuff, but really, really cool. Okay, let's talk about some basic crafting strategies to get you going as a new player. So if you want to gain shards for your crafting on other items, use removals on items with affixes you really want. For example, rare affixes that drop on an item, and you really want to make sure you get all the rare affixes. Use that first. You can use multiple removals on the item to ensure you get the right ones, at least until you hit a forging potential of 0. If you hit forging potential of 0, then go ahead and use a shattering. Also use a shattering on an item where you're just trying to increase your affix pool. Now, during crafting during the campaign, I strongly recommend using discovery liberally if you have it on open affixes when you just don't really need a specific affix. So there's a couple of affixes that you might really want. For example, movement speed on boots is highly desirable, and so maybe you directly craft that with a Glyph of Hope. But otherwise, if there's nothing that you're absolutely need to have, use a discovery. You're going to have a more powerful item, and it's going to cost you nothing to do so. If you get a really bad affix on there that you just can't live with, chaos it. Everything else, use a Glyph of Hope on. And I do recommend, if you don't have any hope or chaos, you're a brand new player, you're just, you're collecting these as you go, Forego crafts on it if you can until you get Chaos or Hope, so that you have the best possible chance of getting a very good item out of it. All right, that's all there is for crafting. It was quite a bit, but there's a lot to crafting in a good way. If you'd like to watch me do some crafting along with other things, I do stream on Twitch 6 days a week. We would love to have you as a part of the community. And we also have a Discord where the community hangs out and talks about Last Epoch and other games as well. We'd love to have you there. Thanks again for watching. I hope you have a great time in LA. I hope this crafting discussion helps you. And I will see you all again real soon.